Don't touch that dial. You're tuned in to the Dread Podcast Network.
Welcome to Development Hell. For every horror movie that hits V.O.D, countless others end up D.O.A. Development Hell is the podcast dedicated to unearthing these cursed horror productions. We're going to find out what went wrong, and then decide if these titles still stand a shot at the green light. I am your host, Josh Corngut. I am the managing editor of Dread Central. I am also a filmmaker in Toronto, Canada. This podcast is a proud member of the Dread Podcast Network. Hi everybody, and welcome back to a brand new episode of Development Hell. Now, long-time listeners of this podcast know, while most of the time we are unearthing horror movies that were never made, on occasion I like to sit down and pick the brains behind the most exciting voices in horror. We have done it recently with the directors behind Scream 6. I've done it with some of my favorite movies, including Werewolves Within and the Mortuary Collection. And today we are sitting down with the writer and director behind 2023's vision of Children of the Corn. So today we are joined by writer-director Kurt Wimmer. Today he is talking about his new vision of horror, bringing the Stephen King short story Children of the Corn back to life. His film stars Alana Kampouris, Kate Moyer, Callan Mulvey, and Bruce Spence. Please enjoy my conversation with Children of the Corn 2023 writer-director Kurt Wimmer. Kurt, first of all, how are you today? How's it going?
It's good. I'm super busy. I'm writing a screenplay live online, and posting it to raw data every day. So it's just crazy. It's like on top of everything else that I'm doing. So every day on YouTube, literally I put up a cut down version of the day along with my commentary on it, why I'm doing what I'm doing, and then I put the raw data. So for anybody who's an absolute masochist and they want to watch every word as it's being typed, that's there as well. Blank page to the end, and then we're going to, God willing, sell it, and then we're going to make it, and blah, blah, blah. So
I think everyone here is going to want to see that happen. But before they do, can you do me a favor and introduce yourself to the Development Hell audience?
Oh, yeah. My name's Kurt Wimmer, and I am a filmmaker, screenwriter, and a director, and a producer. And I've been working making movies for about 4 decades now. And I intend to keep doing it for a long, long time.
Today we are going to highlight talking about your film Children of the Corn, but I'm also going to want to dig into movies that you've made and movies that you wanted to make but didn't really get the chance. But to start things off, I'm wondering, how did you first encounter Children of the Corn? Where did this property show up to you? Were you always a fan, or did it land on your desk?
It came kind of across my transom. A producer friend of mine had the rights, the remake rights, and he said, "Hey, are you a fan of Children of the Corn?" And I lied, and I said yes. But I also saw the writing on the wall, and by the way, I'm talking about the movies, not the short story. When I say I lied and said yes. I quickly went and wrote the script without even asking him, because I thought I saw immediately the tremendous potentiality of it. Pretending, if this is like a multiverse and the other 11 sequels never existed, but there was tremendous potentiality, I thought, in elasticity in the template that Stephen King had created along with the title Children of the Corn. And there was so much packed into it that at that time, when he told that, when it was about religious fanaticism, and that worked really well at the time. Today that wouldn't work so well, but I thought this is also really has a very powerful children and corn, a very powerful ecological theme to it, and political theme too, in terms of how adults are running the show and they're running it into the ground, and we all know that the earth is not getting better, it's getting worse, and the kids are the ones who have to live with it, down the line, and we're not, but they don't really have a say. And so I thought, wow, this is, King, like really great authors, he creates things that are, they have such a fluidity to them that they can be retold through a different lens, every so often. Mm-hmm. And because the story, the concept of killing children, feeling that their parents have been corrupt or adults are corrupt, and taking matters in their own hands to correct the world, is a story that should not only be told once. And so there are people saying, well, they already made that movie. Don't they have any new ideas? Well, they keep telling Romeo and Juliet over and over again. They're going to keep telling it for different audiences. And there's no reason why today's audience, because there is not a subgenre of kids killing adults movies. There's just not. There's only Children of the Corn. Village of the Damned is the only other movie I can think of that does it. So, so aside from the 11 remakes or whatever the hell they were, it hasn't been done to death. And this story should be told for each generation. And it would be unfair, and it wouldn't work to say, well, hey, just go back and watch the one from 1982. You're going to love it. Well, they're not going to love it. They're going to be like, what the hell is this? Like a bunch of, religious freaks. And they're like, it's nothing that's relevant to my world. Mm-hmm. But, the concept of GMOs, being adults putting GMOs in the soil, Roundup exploiting the corn, which is, the earth fundamentally, for their own greed and own benefit. And in the process, killing the world that the kids live in and play in every day. That's highly relevant, I thought, to today. And that's why I was attracted to it.
Now, I'm a huge fan of Stephen King. That said, I've never actually read the story Children of the Corn. Was this film particularly inspired by the story itself, or did you go in your own direction? Or maybe was it both?
We went in our own direction, but it's entirely just inspired by the story. I mean, without that story, there's nothing. I could not have done anything I did. First of all, it's a title, Children of the Corn. Like I said, corn is earth, children is future. If you are a child of the earth and somebody's fucking it up, you better protect it. You stand protected. So there's that. But his story was, it was told through the eyes of adults. And to me, it's the children who are the victims, not the adults. So I just saw no reason to tell it through the eyes of the adults. But his story was about children who perceive their parents as being corrupt, morally corrupt, and they take corrective action. So it's the same story, same title. It's about children, it's about corn, and it's about killing adults.
Books, movies, it doesn't matter what. Do you remember your first encounter with Stephen King? Do you remember your first?
Yeah, sure I do. It was Carrie. I read the book. I can't remember whether I saw the movie first or rather the book. And I still watch that movie all the time because it's just flawless.
Yeah. What do you think makes Stephen King so ubiquitous and just so universal?
Well, that's what I said. Yeah. He's telling these universal stories, like Children of the Corn. I mean, the concept of children rising up and killing adults is something that will appeal to every generation of kids, because every kid wants to kill their parents at some point. And it's like I adapted a movie called, I didn't adapt it. I borrowed heavily from Misery when I made a movie called Spell in 2019. And because, waking up, you get in an accident, you wake up in some old lady's house and you're in the middle of nowhere and you're like, what the fuck is going on? That's ubiquitous. And that story can and should be retold through different lenses. And so I think that's why he speaks to basic fundamental human emotions, usually in subconscious paranoias and fears. And they're things that everybody can relate to. And that's what all movies and all stories should be.
I'm an anxious guy. I have a lot of phobias. Do you have any specific phobias or anxieties of note?
I don't like spiders crawling on me.
Okay, that's a big one for sure.
That's about it.
That's a bad one. I also love monster movies. I don't know if I don't want to give too much away, but this has elements of that.
The He Who Walks?
Yeah, I think you might be the first person to ever sort of dig into who that is or what that character looks like. Where did the inspiration for that
Well, look, I mean, it's in Stephen King's, it's in this short story. It's He Who Walks. He talks about He Who Walks Behind the Roads. So I'm like, well, if you're going to make the movie, we might as well go for it. But as you're well aware, probably, there is a debate that is unspoken in the movie about whether that He Who Walks is real. Because these kids are breathing in this corn fungus and they're all hallucinating. I mean, Boleyn clearly is hallucinating at the beginning of the film. And so, what it really happens, these kids are playing in this dying corn all day long, breathing this stuff in. So there's a question of whether it's real or it's a mass hallucination or it's a manifestation of these kids' trauma. And there is. Or is it an allergic response by the earth to all of these chemicals, these GMOs, these modified organisms, and Roundup that they're putting adults into the soil? Or is it in fact actually some sort of mutation, this chemical mutation that comes in the soil? I actually don't know. And I really enjoyed that in the movie when I was making the movie, just not knowing. And when people would ask me, I'd say, I don't know.
I really like that you brought up the theory behind the Salem witch trials, that everyone was just hallucinating and freaking out and panicking. What brought that into this film for you?
Well, it just writes itself. I mean, again, King does things. He just put a template down that was so rife for exploitation. It's corn. It's kids going crazy. It's just obvious. I mean, what makes and it's true. When I was making the film, we go through the corn, and it was just about blooming. These massive clouds of pollen and spore would burst up everywhere. You'd be like, I'm breathing this stuff in. I mean, you could hardly breathe. There was so much of it in the air. And it was kind of creepy.
I have a feeling that the horror community is going to resonate with Eden, as played by Kate Moyer. She delivers an excellent performance. How did you find her?
We looked at every young lady in America and that wanted to be an actress, and we found a number of really, really good ones. They're all good in different ways, and they also set it on Kate, which I'm very glad we did, because she's I agree with you, she's a sensational actress, and she taught me a lot. I will say I honestly believe she's the best actor I've ever worked with, and I made a movie with Christian Bale.
I know. Yeah, watching her was really, really fun. I think she also brings an element of almost humor and camp to the role that was like really refreshing. Did you intend that with that character, or is that something that
I totally did? I mean, I totally did. We probably, my producer and I, we argued about it all the time. He was team Elena Boleyn, and I was team Eden.
Same.
And there was even more humor from her, and due to his influence, we tamped some of it down, rightfully so. But listen, it's a very tough movie to make because of the conceptually. When King did it, he did himself a service by having it all happen off screen. Then you didn't have to really deal with, can this really happen? I mean, how the hell does this happen? How do kids actually take over a town? I mean, they're kids. Yeah. So, having to do it. So you have to find this sort of tonal path, or I felt that I had to, that was very, very complex. And how do you make it so that it's not like, oh, come on, or it's turgid or laborious? You have to make it somehow a little bit fun. And I loved Eden. Eden's my hero in the movie. And, she's a little Napoleon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, she's mean. Some of the deaths in this movie were meaner and more grisly than I was expecting. And I really liked that about it. Yes, because this was shot, what was it, before the pandemic?
We were the only movie in the world shooting. We started shooting first week of April 2020.
Holy
so,
crap.
So if anybody took it from anybody, Terrifier took it from us.
So you were filming in Australia. Did you film in Australia to escape the pandemic? Or is that just something
No. The pandemic started happening when we were there. We started prep, basically let's say first day of January 2020, when nobody had heard of COVID and we were doing our thing, and just this rumor starts trickling in, and you're like, what? Sounds like bullshit. And then the first person dies in America, like, it's not going. And then and then it's going crazy. Then every movie is just shutting down. You know, the production offices next to us was the one of the Marvel movies, and it just, they went at 11 o'clock at night. They went and knocked on everybody's door and said, you're all going home. Wow. And we were the only ones that said, you know what, we're going to do it. We're going to go for it. But it was, I mean, the situation was so bad that Kate Moyer got on the plane. She's Canadian. She connected in Los Angeles. We got on the plane with her mother. She's 11 years old. She got on the plane to fly to Sydney, Australia. While she was in flight over the Pacific, in the middle of nowhere, Australia shut down.
Whoa.
That was how bad. And if it had shut down before she left, 3 hours before, that would have been it. She wouldn't have been allowed to fly. It would have been over. She lands and she's like, wow, I made it. They're like, yeah, now you're going into quarantine. Welcome to Australia. And so she went to a hotel room, you know, with her mom for 14 days. And that was, I mean, like, it was crazy. I mean, absolutely insane. The 2 weeks leading up to the beginning of shooting, it was absolute chaos.
Did it feel like you had sort of escaped it by being somewhere so far away from America and from everything?
No, we definitely felt it there, you know, because we were the first film to shoot during the pandemic. We invented, you know, we had, you know, John Heaney was working with us in Australia, sort of safety coordinator, and then a very good first AD, Sean Harder, and along with Lucas Foster, the producer, they kind of put their heads together and came up with a lot of the protocols that were ultimately used to go on and shoot during the pandemic. But we definitely didn't escape it. We had to adapt to it. And it, you know, it was, all movies are difficult. So it didn't really make any difference to me. It was just another challenge in making a movie. But, you know, we had a lot of kids, you know, we were doing a lot of kids. So in the middle of the pandemic, you know, you're really, really conscious of what can go wrong. And but we did it. We made it through. No one got sick.
No one got sick. So there was no shutdowns. There was no pauses.
Not one person.
How long was your shoot?
It's about, as I recall, it's about 29 days.
I don't know if that's lucky or if that was, you guys really had it together, but
both. It's both. You know, it's both, right? I mean, you can't. It's God, what's that? Edgar Allan Poe, The Mask of the Red Death. It's the Mask of the Red Death, you know, which is COVID, which is, you can try to keep it out, and maybe you will for a certain period of time. And Australia did that. They tried to keep it out, but you can't keep it out.
Well, the islands lasted longer than a lot of other places, like New Zealand.
It did, but then they got whacked, you know.
Was there a sense of like fear and dread, or were you guys able to still have fun together in the shooting environment? Or did it feel like
we had a great time. We had a great time. We created our little bubble.
Yeah.
And that was it. These are the only people I saw and we saw. And it was like the rest of the world kind of didn't exist once we got started. There were some real challenges. Like we had to clear out sets every 25 minutes, which is extremely difficult, given the really tight schedule we were on. And, you know, clearing out a set is very difficult to begin with. I mean, it's herding blind squirrels, especially if you're dealing with children, like lots of children. And then reassembling that set 15 minutes later is equally challenging. You lose a lot of shooting time. So it created a lot of pressure, practical pressure in that respect.
There's something eerie about creating sort of an ecologically themed thriller while the Earth was, you know, trying to shrug us off the way that it was. Like, did that parallel ever strike you when making this movie?
It didn't occur to me until you just said
it. Interesting. It's strange, and it's kind of cool that it all happened at the same time. But then I feel like I remember hearing about this movie, I think in 2019 and 2020, and really wondering where it went and being really excited when it finally got announced. Why was there such a long pause?
It's easy. COVID. I mean, the theaters were shut down for at least 2 years until Maverick. You know, you could argue maybe No Way Home, but I think that was very rare exception. Maverick changed everything. That was like 9 months ago or something like that. So it wasn't until then that you could, you know, I mean, we wanted to release, we tried to release it, but we realized this is just a disaster if we do it. And so we're like, you know what, let's just batten down the hatches and wait until the world, God willing, returns to normal.
There's a motif that I found interesting in the first half of the film where Eden is particularly fascinated with the Queen of Hearts. Can you talk a little bit about that choice?
Well, you know, that it's as she says, the Queen of Hearts, she makes her own reality. You know, she wants to paint, you know, the roses are white, paint them red. You know, that's like the ultimate example of somebody who controls reality. And Eden, of course, you know, and Eden lives in her own, like all kids do. They live in a fantasy world, you know, that they're playing pirates, you know, they're making each other walk the plank and stuff like that. It's all, everything's, you know, fun of games. Their connection to reality is different than ours. But, you know, she admired someone who takes control of their environment. And that's very much what Eden's, you know, Eden's personality trait. She takes control of her environment.
Yeah, I like the part when they're painting the corn with blood. That was a nice touch. This is, I'm assuming, by far the biggest Children of the Corn film that's ever come out. But I'm wondering, did you take the time to go through all those bizarre direct-to-video sequels or any of them?
No, I did. I might have watched one. I don't remember. I watched the original, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if this is the biggest or not. I mean, this one's not very big.
It is.
You know,
I think I would say that it probably is.
Okay. Perhaps. It certainly didn't feel like it, but.
Interesting. So if you're okay with it, I'm always really fascinated in talking to filmmakers about projects that never made it to the finish line. And you've been in this industry for a little while now. Has there been a number of projects that have been trapped in development hell?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I learned very early on not to give my screenplays to people when I don't, you at a certain point, at a certain point you start to learn to listen, put your ear to the railroad ties of Hollywood and hear the sort of universal locomotive that's either coming down those tracks or not. And if you don't hear it, and if I don't hear it, then I won't surrender my material to them. I do everything I can to put them into positions where they're going to get made, where something is going to get made. And if they're not going to, I don't put them in a position. I just have them here and they're waiting to go. I'm just waiting for the right opportunity to stick its head up. And then I'm going to, you know, whack-a-mole it with the script.
Do you have anything in your desk that you are particularly attached to and would like to see get made next?
I have so many things, countless, that I intend to get. It's not going to be next, you know, in the next 20 years. I just want to make as many films as humanly possible. And there's not a real hierarchy to it, you know, and they're all different too. You know, there's some that I just want to produce, and then there's, you know, a few I want to direct, and there's, you know, and some are big and some are very small, and some are sort of medium, you know, John Wicky action films, etc. So they all sort of fit in different buckets, and I want to see them get made for different reasons, and they get made in different ways.
I've seen, you know, you haven't done a whole lot of horror, but there's this, and you were talking about Spell, which is another recent film of yours. Is there anything horror in your desk that we can hear about?
Well, you know, I honestly, again, I want to say, hey, I don't think that these are horror. Spell wasn't horror either. You know, it's like Misery. Misery wasn't horror.
I think it is. I would argue that it is.
You know, I mean, like it's not supernatural. I mean, it's a kidnapping. It's a kidnapping film. You know, but yeah, I've got one that we're thinking about making called Angelino Heights, which is just, you know, two people in a house. Angelino Heights is a neighborhood, an old neighborhood here in Los Angeles. So horror is very, very difficult to do right. It's like comedy. The tone has to be just right to really, really work. And I really respect horror for that reason. I would handle it with care. I mean, you just can't throw a monster's blood, and I hate jump scares. I hate them. I mean, maybe you could tell from Children of the Corn, there really aren't any jump scares.
Maybe one, yeah.
Yeah, there's
not much.
Right. No, I can't stand the sound stings. I think it's just really, really cheap. And, so to me, it's the sort of psychology, it's like Carrie. It was all about the psychology of the character and the struggle she was going through and how she dealt with it.
If you were given carte blanche to any of Stephen King's stories, do you have an idea of what you would want to pick up and direct?
No, I don't think there are any that I would take on. They've done most of them, and I mean, they've all been done pretty well. So I mean, I don't know what I could bring to it. I mean, Children of the Corn, fortunately, these 11 things were, I think, from what I hear, so not very good, that it was kind of wide open to do it, hopefully what was be better than what they've done. So, but when you're talking about other things that have been made by Stanley Kubrick, etc., or Brian De Palma, that's not really the case.
Well, I mean, he famously hated Kubrick's version of The Shining.
No, I know he did. Did. But nonetheless,
that's fair enough.
I wouldn't want to go there.
I thought I heard rumors. I don't know if people at home realize this, but you wrote and directed Ultraviolet, right?
Yep.
I thought I heard rumors once upon a time of follow-up to that. Was that ever real, or is that all?
No, I don't think so. They literally made, I think in Japan they stole it and made a cartoon out of it, which I don't care. And all kinds of manga things were going on. I mean, they were obsessed with that movie. For the obvious reasons, it was sort of manga before that was a thing.
Yeah. So you've never heard of any rumblings of a future for that property?
No, I haven't.
Okay. Was there ever a horror movie when you were young that fucked you up the most, that really left you rattled?
Well, there's different kinds. Like, again, you look at one of the great ones of all time is Rosemary's Baby, and I just absolutely love that movie. But that's all psychological, and there's not a jump scare in that movie, and I love the fact of that. When I was a kid, though, my parents snuck me in to see Night of the Living Dead, and I was like, that was genuinely scary to me. I don't know, I almost adult when I saw The Entity, the Barbara Hershey movie. I said, that movie is scary, and I'm amazed at how much they did with so little in that movie. Genuinely scary films. If you look at Alien, which is a horror film, even though it's theoretically sci-fi, that's a horror film. That's a monster in a house movie, and that's actually works as a horror film. So, but that's why I say those movies are few and far between, the ones that actually work. Like Suspiria is very creepy, but weirdly creepy, so creepy that you don't want to revisit it again. It's like, that was too creepy.
Have you seen the remake?
I started watching it.
Okay. All right. And not even just horror movie, but like commercial or movie that wasn't necessarily supposed to be scary. Like, do you remember of anything really disturbing you when you were young?
I have to go back to Night of the Living Dead. That's the one that sticks out in my head, because I really remembered the graphic nature of that, when I must have been, I don't know, I was 3 years old or something when it came out. And, the images, still to this day, I can see them so vividly. I can see so absolutely vividly. There's no other movie that, and I loved horror films when I was a kid. I was a massive Famous Monsters fan, and I lived overseas a lot of my life, and I would and all they played was like Mexican vampire movies, and I'd eat those up too, and all the Hammer films. I love them, even though they're not even remotely scary. But I love them just because it's theoretically the genre of horror. And I remember when I was a kid, I lived in Berlin, and I would go around, because there's a lot of U.S. military there, and I went around to everybody's offices with a petition to get more horror films on the one local United States Services television station we had. And everybody thought I was crazy. I was this 10-year-old kid going and saying, sign a petition for more horror films. And I realized they all thought I was saying more like R-rated films. And they were scared, and they said, they'll just sign it to get me out of the office before they got, brought up on charges or something like that. But yeah, I was a great lover of horror, but most horror films are not scary.
Correct. Yes, that is true.
Most recently, I thought The Witch was one of the best most creepiest movies I've ever seen, and my hats off in that movie. Although the devil as Puss in Boots was kind of odd, but other than that, I thought it was so spectacular.
Would you consider that a horror film? The Witch?
Well, so yes, witches. As I said, I think it's a horror film. You have to have a supernatural element, and the devil shows up in the movie, then it qualifies as a horror film. And when witches start to fly, it qualifies as a horror film.
Well, speaking of devils and witches, I'm curious. In your life, do you ever believe you've had a supernatural encounter? Is that something you believe in at all?
No, it's not. Unfortunately, I don't. And you have to believe that if you're going to make it through life as an adult, walking outside in the dark at night or sleeping alone in a dark room with the closet doors just cracked slightly open.
Yeah, I'm like you, but I'd like to believe. I'm always keeping my eye out, but there has yet to be any kind of proof. But you'd be surprised how people answer that question. Some people are out there.
Look, I believe it, but we always have, it's just like religion. Some people want to or need to believe in religion in order to get through life. Mm-hmm. And some people believe, like in superstition, a lot of people believe in ghosts. I mean, it's really crazy how many people actually believe
most people
in ghosts. Yeah.
50% of America believes in ghosts.
Yeah, they do. That's because, I think we've all, even those of us who don't believe in, we've been walking at night and then suddenly you get that tingle and you're like, oh shit. Suddenly I believe in ghosts for right now until I get my ass in the house, and then I can stop. But even today, these days, sometimes you're walking, you're hanging out in a graveyard, and it's 2 a.m, and suddenly you get that weird chill. Mm-hmm. It's strange. It's odd.
I know. I
mean, listen, would you sleep in an empty grave at night on a bed?
In an empty graveyard or in the actual grave?
No, in a grave that's been dug. Just the hole. They're dug the hole. Would you go? Someone says, I'll bet you.
You'd have to pay me at least $1,000.
$50.
No, $50 more than $50.
Well, wait a minute. It's $50.
Listen, I'm not scared, but I don't like being uncomfortable.
No, well, I'm going to say at a certain point in that night, if you're all alone, you're going to start thinking.
You would. Maybe you'd get a good idea for a movie, so it would become quite valuable.
Maybe.
You never know. So we kind of talked about this earlier, but I'd like to circle back. What is next for you as a filmmaker? Are you already on to the next project, or is it just in the...
Well, we're making The Beekeeper, which David Ayer directed, and Jason Statham starring. It's coming out later this year.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's about beekeeping.
Oh, okay.
Well, it's everything's about this thematic. I'm fast. Everything is thematic. I mean, you can see Children of the Corn is highly thematic. Mm-hmm. I start with character and theme, and bees are really interesting creatures to me. Like corn, they're kind of fundamental to life. And beekeepers, people who keep these beehives, are very interesting. The way these bees have these very metered societies and cultures, and they're so much part of our parlance and our traditions. Busy as a bee, etc. They've got the Bernini bees that you can see all over Rome in the friezes and the carvings, which were part of the papal family. And the bees were on Napoleon's standard. So bees and Charlemagne's standard. Bees, they've been cultivating bees going back to before Greece. And
Mm-hmm.
the first alcohol was made from honey. Bees, as we know, they pollinate everything. We'd be screwed without bees. So it's kind of fascinating. But beekeepers are these guys we think of in white suits that come and if the queen dies or something like that, they can put a new queen in and revive that hive. But it's very fascinating that there is a force out there that is watching over the equilibrium of society. And now when the beekeeper comes to the beehive, the bees are unaware of it. The bees are unaware of this big fucking dude. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to swear. They're unaware of this big guy in this white suit who's mm-hmm. reaching in and pulling out the queen and putting in a new one, or lifting out, the screens and rubbing off the honey and wax. They're unaware of that. And so in some ways, it's almost like a divine force that's watching over their highly functioning society. And so I find the concept of beekeeper really fascinating, especially if there are people out there, who are beekeepers who keep an eye on our society and take corrective measures when shit hits the fan.
Did you say you filmed it already or not yet?
Yeah, we're done. We finished in November, and David's busy putting it together right now.
Did you get stung at all?
No, nobody got stung.
No one got stung?
No, but we had EpiPens on the set just in case.
Okay. I know if you're familiar with Candyman, Tony Todd starred in that. There were tons of bees, and he had a contract clause that every time he got stung, he got $1,000. And I think he left that set with another like $25,000.
Really?
Yeah. So
yeah,
not a bad
nice.
idea for next time.
We shot it in England, in the countryside outside of London, and the bees are nice there apparently.
They're a little more chill. They're a little more relaxed.
Yeah. They're more cultured.
All right. Well, I want to thank you for taking the time to chat with me today. It was fascinating. Congrats on Children of the Corn. It's really fun. I hope everyone at home will give it a chance. And yeah, I hope we chat again sometime soon.
It was great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to Development Hell. If you enjoy this podcast, then please do us a major favor of leaving us 5 stars and writing a positive review. It really makes all the difference in the world. We'll see you next week with a brand new episode of Development Hell.
Thank you for listening to the Dread Podcast Network.